Welcome to My Journey Home to the Latin Mass. Today our special guest is Connor, and he wants to tell his story about his journey to the Latin Mass. So Connor, we'd be interested in hearing your story.
Sure. So I was brought up in a Catholic home, had wonderful parents, and the new Mass is the only Mass that I had ever known. I didn't know there really was a previous Mass, to be honest. But I was brought up to pray every night, have a morning offering, an evening offering, pray the rosary. I had a scapular growing up, so you might say that I did have all of these things already that you would often find at a Latin Mass. And so I was thankful for the parish that I did grow up with. We had a very good priest, and he would incorporate things like Latin and some of the older prayers that I know now are said after Low Mass.
Yeah.
He would do those sorts of things. And whenever I would go to a different church, I never understood why those things weren't being done there.
Yeah.
And I also didn't understand why some of the liturgies were the way they were. They just seemed very foreign to me.
Yeah.
I knew it was still Catholic, and I knew it was still the Mass, but it's something, I wondered why there was this disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually when I was in, probably 7th or 8th grade, in one of my theology classes, I did learn about the fact that, there's a different version of the Mass and things like that, and it did get me interested.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school, I had a big interest in history, and so I took some world cultures and world history courses, and I learned about basically everything that had happened, the changes in the liturgy, things like that. And then eventually I went to college. I went to a very good Catholic college. I was thankful that I was able to start attending the Latin Mass there. I didn't understand it at first, of course. And a very good friend of mine, he started bringing me, and he started teaching me basically all of the pieces that I had always had from childhood. And finally, they all seemed to suddenly be put together once I had the Mass and the older style of doing things, all of the doctrine that comes with it when you go to that Mass. And I've been really going devotedly ever since.
How many years would you say that's been?
This is probably my 4th year going completely to the Latin Mass.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Did you go to a Catholic high school when you were first introduced to the old Mass at that time?
No, I went from Catholic school from kindergarten all the way to 8th grade.
Okay.
And then public high school, and then
Okay.
Catholic school for college again.
Okay. And I wanted to point out, John, we very often we've heard people's stories, how they end up at the Latin Mass. Very often there's a friend brings somebody.
Yes.
A friend talks it up, a friend's going, a friend brings you along. And so we did a show one time where we talked about how important it is for those of us who love the Latin Mass to bring friends.
Mm-hmm.
Father Ripperger has talked about one of the biggest faults of traditionalists is this pride. And often this pride manifests itself in this spirit of secretness or whatever, where you're not willing to evangelize and invite people to the old Mass. So you're another example of a Catholic where you had this fertile ground prepared through the Novus Ordo, through daily prayer, wearing a scapular, attending the new Mass with reverence. And then here comes the seed of the friend, and of course God, the Holy Ghost, gives the water, and then out comes, let's call it a vocation to the old Mass.
It's true, yeah.
What you talked about when you first attended, you had no idea what was going on. Can you remember about what that felt like, what parts of the Mass that you were lost? Because I can remember that sort of stuff. There was my mom was at Mass today, and she brought a friend who had never been to the old Mass before, and she said, couldn't really find most of the time I was lost, but I did have a friend and whatever. And she pointed out that she occasionally attends the Ukrainian rite, and she said, I actually am able to follow that along, but not the old Mass. And I said, well, that was probably because of English, a language difference. But anyway, to you, do you remember the first time you attended Mass, the old Mass, what you struggled with?
There was the language barrier. I hesitate to call it that. it's not so much a language barrier because it's not as though you're having a conversation with someone. That's a true language barrier. It was a barrier, I'd say, insofar as I just needed to learn it.
Mhm.
It was just
Yeah.
a matter of going a couple of times and starting to get the hang of it.
Yeah.
Because once you go, honestly, 3-4 times tops,
Yeah.
you really do get the hang of
Sure.
the Mass.
Yeah.
And then once you go for a year or so, you know, you don't even need to follow along with your missal the whole
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
And you start to learn the prayers in Latin. It's just repetition.
Yeah.
So you don't need to be a Latin scholar. You don't need to be bilingual to go to this Mass. That's really not what it's about, although the language preserves the truth and the doctrine and safeguards it. It's more so about you being there in the presence of God, uniting your prayer with that of the priest and the saints
Mhm.
at the ultimate prayer, the Mass and the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was the biggest difficulty for me the first time, but it didn't stop me. I was never deterred from going back. I wanted to continue to go because
Why?
I was amazed at the reverence of the priest. And again, that's not to say that I didn't experience new masses that weren't reverent. I grew up with that. But I was very interested in this different appearance of a
Yeah.
type of reverence. Facing the altar was, I think, the biggest thing because it really
Yeah.
illustrated to me that that's the focal point
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
That Christ in the tabernacle, we are all eyes on him right now.
Yeah, that's an important thing. How has the old Mass changed your spirituality in the 4 years that you've been attending?
I would say that my spirituality, I've started praying more. I didn't pray the rosary every day, but I did pray it. Now I do pray it every day. I pray various litanies every day. I've developed devotions to saints. And those were just things that I hadn't even heard about
Mhm.
until I started going to the Latin Mass. And so I was thankful to have learned about really this treasury of prayers and devotions that the church does have, that we have at our disposal. And I don't think enough people know about those. The way that the saints can help you, the way that the formal prayers that we're given can really enhance your understanding of the faith itself. That and also more time for contemplation, giving God his due, listening to him, shutting out the noise of the world. And honestly, the idea of penance, doing more penance, fasting, kneeling when you pray, simple things like that. But when all put together,
Yeah.
you'd be amazed at it can really change your spiritual life.
Yeah.
It really can.
Yeah, that's something that's like totally missing in the new Mass is the idea of penance, discomfort, subjecting yourself to hardships, repenting of sins,
Mhm.
that you are not immaculately conceived and sinless. My feelings, you know, when I used to attend the new Mass was very much like that, the jar when you attend the old, that was apparent. Would you recommend, you know, let's just say you're going to bring somebody, do you think it makes a difference whether a noob shows up to a low Mass or a high Mass?
You know, a lot of people say come to High Mass as your first one, and it is very beautiful, and I love High Mass. I actually, the first year of my going to the Latin Mass was low.
Just low.
And
okay.
that didn't bother me at all. So I might be somewhat of an outlier when I say go to low Mass, it's easy.
Yeah.
And then people were amazed at how short it is. So people, whoa, 30, 40 minutes, I'm coming back, you know.
Well, I think that's really important, actually,
Yeah.
because you know, whenever I tell people to come to the Latin Mass, I say it's probably going to be an hour and a half to 2 hours, and I just give them
For
that
the
warning,
high,
just
yeah.
so that they know, you know, for
Yeah.
the High Mass, just so
Yeah.
that they know that. Not looking at their watch and saying, "Hey, like,
Right.
we're not even to offertory yet."
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's really important as well as setting like clear expectations
Yeah.
for time frames. But the low Mass can be,
Mhm.
you know, a really beautiful Mass, and you know, and actually that was my experience, was the low Mass first, and then whenever you actually go to a High Mass and experience the chant, the singing, it's
Mhm.
it's truly incredible because it sort of puts two different dimensions together. and
Yeah. I
it's
think
awesome.
I think if you're going to bring a friend and you're not sure which Mass to take them to, It depends on the disposition of the friend.
Oh,
I
yeah.
really do think it does. Whether they might be more inclined to having an efficacious experience at the low mass or the high mass. Me, I was very happy at low mass, but I was already very much inclined because I had heard things like Gregorian chant, and I was used to things like incense and a lot of reverence. So I was very much inclined to that. Other people, if they're not used to those sorts of things in the liturgy, start them off slow. Bring them to the low mass, and I think they'll want to learn more after they
Yeah.
experience it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Connor, for your testimony,
Thank
for your
you.
journey to the Latin Mass. Thank you, Ryan, for
Thanks,
hearing
John,
on the
for
show. Thank you
hosting.
for watching. This has been My Journey to the Latin Mass. Everyone have a great day.